If you're tuned into this video, you know who Eddie Murphy is. You probably know who Ernie Barnes is, and you're probably familiar with the Sugar Shack painting. If you aren't familiar with the Sugar Shack painting, it's the painting that was on Marvin Gaye's album cover back in 1976, and is the painting that was made really popular by Good Times with all the people dancing and everything. So today we're going to look at a clip where Eddie Murphy talk about this painting, how much he acquired it for, how much the duplicate sold for. I got to explain a little bit about that. And I'm going to talk about, hey, why do wealthy people invest in art? It's a tax haven. I'm going to break down why. I did a video a long time ago talking about it, but this Eddie Murphy clip will give us great context.
You had the painting from the beginning of Good Times.
I have that painting now.
You still have it. I thought you sold that painting.
No, the duplicate of that painting just sold at Christie's for like $16 million.
$16 million for the duplicate. You had the real one.
I have the real one. I think I paid $50,000 for that picture. After Marvin Gaye passed away, I bought it from his estate.
So you're rich then.
I got that painting.
We got to talk about, and I got to explain the whole concept of the duplicate, because when I posted that short up, everybody was going in like, why is a duplicate worth $16 million? And it was all these questions and people arguing. So let's kind of back up and go into context. Ernie Barnes is the artist who painted it. He grew up in where I consider my second hometown, Durham, North Carolina. He actually went to my alma mater, North Carolina Central University. He was a professional football player, but when he walked away from the game, he focused on art. Now, how is a duplicate worth that much? I personally think he misspoke. It's not a duplicate. Okay, let's take a look at the two versions of this painting, because I don't think it's necessarily a duplicate. A duplicate is an exact copy of something that came before. This is a little bit different. If we look at this painting right here, all the way on the right-hand side where the cursor is, you see in this top corner right here, that top corner is the difference between this first version that Eddie Murphy purchased and the second version that was used on Good Times. This version, the original version, you see this banner at the top. It has Marvin Gaye, and it has his album information there. Well, if we look at the version that was used on Good Times that was created later, you see there's no banner with Marvin Gaye. It's gone. It's not there. So it's not necessarily a duplicate. The version that was used for Good Times sold at Christie's for $15.5 million. So that's essentially what Eddie Murphy was referring to. That's a little bit about, everybody asks, how could a duplicate sell so much? It's really two versions of the same painting. The first version was made specifically for Marvin Gaye's album cover. The second version was made for the Good Times TV show. The version that sold for $15.5 million was the one that was on Good Times. So presumably Eddie Murphy is right. His painting is probably worth a hell of a lot more than $15.5, $16 million. Now, why do wealthy people buy art? What is the benefit? How do they gain financially from buying art? We all know Hov said it best on the 444 album. Hey, I just bought some artwork with 1 million, 2 years later, or 2 million. But essentially, when people have artwork, they're allowed to do a 1031 exchange. And I'll put a link to an older video where I talked about it. And I think I wrote on a whiteboard back in the days when I used to have a whiteboard to break it down. But in short, essentially a 1031 exchange is a way for you to postpone having to pay tax obligations from capital gains tax. Now, how is that done? And you can do it with painting, you can do it with property. It's more common with property, less common with artwork, because most people aren't buying. You may have a rental property in your house in your lifetime, but most people aren't going to have a damn Picasso that's worth $2 million. So essentially what a 1031 exchange is, Eddie Murphy purchased this art for $50,000. Okay, let's say that he sells it next year and he sells it for $20 million. Okay, if he sells that artwork for $20 million, he's going to have to pay long-term capital gain taxes on over $19 million in profit. That is a big ass tax bill. You're talking about 46% of that automatically gone. So this is how wealthy people use art to avoid and postpone that tax obligation, and you can postpone it indefinitely. Essentially, all he would do is he has one piece of art that he purchased for $50,000. Okay. Same example. If he were to sell that art for $20 million, he's going to have to pay taxes on over $19 million in profit, which is a no go. But if he took that property, he took that painting that was worth $20 million and used it to acquire another piece of art that's worth $25 million, he avoids the tax obligation on the profit that he would have made if he sold it. Well, because he exchanged one piece of art for another piece of art, he just essentially avoided the tax obligation. Now, the 1031 exchange doesn't make your tax obligation disappear. If he sells that second piece of art, there could be a tax obligation there. But with the 1031 exchange, can you essentially defer it forever? Yeah, he could just keep flipping his artwork. $50,000 worth of art turned to $20 million. He used that to exchange that for a $25 million piece of artwork, and he can just keep flipping it up. You can do the same thing with property. When I sold my property in 2001, I did a series called Selling in the Seller's Market. I was actually thinking about doing a 1031 exchange. You can do it with property as well. There are some rules that apply. Again, I'll link the video in the description where I break down the rules for the 1031 exchange in detail. But if you have a rental property, instead of selling it and being taxed on that long-term or short-term capital gains, you can do a 1031 exchange, purchase another property equal or greater value, and avoid the tax consequences altogether. It's essentially postponed. And if you keep flipping it, you can do it indefinitely. There are some rules, and where the money has to go, where you sell it, it has to go to a specific person who's identified to hold the funds for a 1031 exchange. There's time periods when you have to identify the property, when you have to close on the property. I talk about that in the video, but I wanted to just break this down because that video got a lot of views. A lot of people had questions about the artwork. How could a duplicate sell for 16 million? And people use it to avoid taxes, and I wanted to break down how it's used to avoid tax liability for short or long-term capital gains. If you enjoyed this video, check out the video on the screen. There's going to be more content related to finances and attorney reactions.